Sabrina 70s comic, issue 11. We started out with Sabrina keeping Harvey from walking into some tough guy who bumps into him anyways, and then argues with Harvey instead of apologizing, talking like a moron, calling him the stupid one. He hits Harvey away, with a punch being censored for some reason. And then Sabrina wants to use magic on the bully. Out of complete fucking nowhere, Della shows up behind her and asks if she was about to right a wrong, which somehow would be considered un-witch-like, which I call absolute bullshit on. The last time we had a bullshit plot like this, she got out of trouble when she convinced Della there was an evil side effect to the good deed she did. And here, she's about to abuse her magic against someone. I would have expected Della to applaud, but instead she expects Sabrina to applaud for the bully. You'd think if she wants her to abuse her magic, she would be telling her to abuse her magic against the bully. Too bad this Della character won't get killed off, or ideally turn good, because I never want to see her again if she's going to be portrayed like this. She deserved to be turned into a secretary in the 90s comic. I knew she'd never measure up to Enchantra. The bully's a jerk again, and then picks up a girl and changes his mind about being a jerk to her. He immediately likes her, and she says he's a strong one, and she says that him being the strongest guy around must make everyone feel so safe. She guilts him about using all that power to hurt. The bully gets hit with a football, and the girl tells him that he's irresistible because his kindness shines through, and he's the sort of man girls find hard to resist. Right as he's obviously about to punch someone. Is she intentionally trying to manipulate him into not being like this? She doesn't come off as actually loving him. She just comes off as wanting him to be better. Sabrina has her fingers on her head, and a woman calls the love-struck bully thug and says that she'll tell him when to speak. What a weird story. Della gets called by Sabrina because she could sense vibrations, and Sabrina says that only witches can do magic, and that woman is not a witch. Della reveals that the most powerful kind of magic that anyone can use is called love. Della wouldn't say that with a smile. This story would have felt a little less forced if that woman was being magically controlled. Instead, Sabrina, the main character, literally just stood around and did nothing. Della just hurts the comic, because it seems like the only reason she keeps showing up to bother Sabrina in particular, when she surely should have other things to do, is that Sabrina is the main character. So it makes the comic feel even less grounded in reality, because this isn't a mundane, relatable life that happens to have magic in it anymore, which was the whole appeal of the comic. Sabrina just has to be special, so she just has to deal with this meddling, holding her back from being herself, which makes her feel like less of an escapist character. You're already asking me to swallow the idea of a witch protagonist. Now I have to deal with Della bothering her for no reason too? But at least it makes me root for her even more when she does good with her magic. Because she's not just doing good with it, she's also rebelling against Della and being independent. In the next story, Reggie says that Sabrina's pretty and he wants to get to know her better, even though she's dating Harvey. At least that's new, but it's also out of character. What took him so long? Archie thinks it's a waste of time because Sabrina's already dating Harvey. So, she couldn't have still been dating Harvey when he went on a date with her. Sabrina wants Harvey over when she's babysitting the Clarks, but he has to help his father paint the house. Sabrina says that's a shame because the Clarks have a great TV, and Harvey says that he needs to earn his allowance. So Sabrina's nice enough to humor him with a smile. Reggie plans on showing up. We could have just cut to him showing up at her house, but instead he annoyed us. He tells Sabrina they just happened to be in the neighborhood and thought he'd drop in. He gives the little kid a sucker, and he immediately hates him, saying that he doesn't like his face. And that makes sense because Reggie's a smug jerk calling him great. But then the kid should have said that instead of the story trying to make us feel sorry for Reggie because he's hated for no apparent reason. It's not like the kid knows him personally and therefore knows what a jerk he is at school and stuff. For no reason, Reggie laughs at being insulted and just calls him a cute little kid, without explaining that it's because he reminds Reggie of himself. The kid hits him with a sucker saying he's not a kid, and the sheer force of that attack damages the sucker, which seems unrealistic. Sabrina tells Reggie he should leave for upsetting the kid, and Reggie cathartically says that she shouldn't let a spoiled brat ruin her evening. I like his lack of leniency. He says he wants to get to know her better, and she says in confusion that she knows him well enough already. He says he'll sit next to her so they can watch TV together. So she says, uh-oh, and zaps the couch so that's an armchair and he sits on the floor, to force him not to sit beside her. Does she actually secretly hate Reggie, and so she's making any excuse she can to get him to leave her alone? It'd make more sense if she just didn't want him to find out she was a witch. So the kid laughs at him, and he tries to sit on a hassock next to her, so she turns it into a cactus. I wish she explained that the reason she's so persistent about this is that she knows Reggie's a smug, unlikable jerk. She turns the hassock back to normal, as I wonder if the kid saw it being a cactus, but he doesn't mention that. Reggie pushes the boy, telling him to get himself milk, and he says he'll only do it if he promises to show him more tricks. Sabrina thinks he should go now. It helps her likability that she's not being rude to his face. She's relatable for not liking him, but she's also polite and smart by keeping it subtle. She says he should go now, but she's not glaring at him. He sure is despicable here, literally trying to kiss her. Wow, that made me uncomfortable. I didn't expect the comic to make him this much of a villain. He's really not that different from Anton in the Sonic manga, who did this to Amy. And just like him, he's just there to be hurt and humiliated as a punishment for being a jerk. And it doesn't happen nearly often enough to make up for it. I read on TV Tropes that Reggie was made more of a nice, relatable guy in the Archie comics. It sounds like that kind of defeats the purpose of his character, though. Like, what's the point of keeping him around if he's not there to be a jerk that gets punished for it? Sabrina turns into a dog and says that she was going to ask him the same thing. Then, rather than Reggie asking how a dog can talk, he asks Sabrina why she's from the kitchen. She lies that she was getting a glass of milk, and he asks where that dog came from. And she messes with his head by lying to him, trying to make him doubt his own perception of reality. I remember learning recently that that's what the word gaslighting means. If this qualifies as gaslighting, then Sabrina does it a lot. She does it to Harvey too, but I understand because she has to do this to prevent people from figuring out she's a witch. Reggie leaves thinking he needs glasses, and Archie just laughs when he tells him what happened, rather than accusing him of losing his mind, or at least figuring out Sabrina's a witch. Even if people don't know that Sabrina's responsible for all the weird things happening around her, you'd think she would still get a reputation as someone who has a lot of weird things happen around her, and people would want to avoid her because of that. But she erases memories of it, I guess. In the comedy page, Harvey annoys Hilda by accident eating potato chips loudly, and she uses magic, no, not to make his eating silent, which I would do. Instead, she turns the chips into an alligator, or crocodile, I don't know. So now she has to erase his memory of this. She did something spiteful with magic because she wanted to punish him. But if she was going to do something with magic that would make it really obvious, she was better off just teleporting him home. In the next story, Sabrina whines about being a witch to Della, who is starting to appear as often as that stupid mentor in the sitcom who didn't need to exist. But at least he had an excuse in universe to show up. Della's a good point when she says that one shouldn't be ashamed of one's own kind. And to witches, it's the untalented brat mortals who are strange. Well, she's right. Normally it wouldn't make you look very good to be ashamed of your own kind. Sabrina drops something, and a guy gives it back. He says its name is Sal. That's a girl's name. That actually makes the name Snail sound a lot better. He's called that because he's a slow failure. He whines that he doesn't want to be slow, but that's who he is. The whole time I'm wondering if this is just a test from Della, because it's so convenient that she happened to interact with this guy all of a sudden, after talking to Della. But it's not forced, just surprising. If this had nothing to do with Della, I'd have to wonder why she was at the start of the story. Seriously, it should be explained that the reason Della keeps visiting Sabrina is that she's visiting Hilda because they're best friends. So she just likes hanging out with Hilda, and Sabrina happens to be there. Sabrina disapproves of teasing and says she won't ever tease him and they'll be friends. Then Reggie and Archie insist on teasing both of them, being complete assholes out of nowhere. I understand Reggie, but why Archie? Oh yeah, because Archie's just as bad as him. He's just presented as the good guy because he's a loser, so that's supposed to be more relatable. If he's a jerk, then he's not a good everyman. Sabrina Sass finally tells him that they're all mean and cruel and unfair. Reggie says that they're just stating the facts, and Sabrina says he's just as fast as anyone, instead of saying that they don't have to state the facts because he already knows them. She gets so mad that she casts a spell to force them all to run, and Snail runs ahead really fast, and then runs backwards. This impresses the girls because those guys are their ace track stars. Sabrina thinks, Della was right, I'll never complain again. It's real good to be a witch. Then the girls swarm Snail, and 2 of them invite him to parties. He says to call him Flash and call him next week, because suddenly he thinks he's all booked up. Why would he say that? So Sabrina comes home slamming the door, sobbing anyways, because her magic backfired. She just can't learn her lesson that meddling with the lives of mortals always backfires. She'd love her magic if she used it for everything else. She can't make any major changes. In the comedy page, Sabrina complains that it's been raining for 3 days while holding a weird, transparent umbrella just over her head. She asks for the Witch's Manual and casts a spell. I love that it's called the Witch's Manual. It's just funny to me. Like she's a car. Somehow, she creates snow instead of getting rid of the rain. That wasn't funny. She would have imagined a sunny day just fine. It's not like she was trying to put a potion together and forgot which arbitrary ingredient she had to put in it. In the next comedy page, Hilda opens the fridge and wants to punish Harvey for taking her sub. So she teleports it away and makes him bite his hands. In the next comedy page, Reggie makes fun of Archie for landing in jail in Monopoly, and he brags about being great at Monopoly. It's so interesting to see teenagers willing to give board games a chance, and it's so unfair that cell phones and the internet had to ruin that. Why does Archie hang out with Reggie? It comes off like Reggie's his enemy, his bully. Sabrina casts a spell to make sure Reggie lands in jail, but it turns out she warped him to actual jail, and I actually giggled, with him saying, "Will someone tell me how I got here?" See, that's how you do it. I can understand her magic screwing up here because she would have imagined him landing in jail when she said that spell. The problem is, she clearly said the spell out loud, so she should have been heard and blamed for Reggie disappearing. She should have said that in a thought bubble, so I have to assume she erased everyone's memory of this and warped Reggie back right after this. But we don't have to see that because it's obvious, and wouldn't make for a funny ending. In the next comedy page, Sabrina asks Hilda how they'll ski when there's no snow. What a stupid question. Have you forgotten that Hilda's a witch? She should have done this spell before Hilda. So Hilda covers the hills with snow and turns the sky yellow. Then the sky's pink again as Sabrina asks if she could also cover the hills with boys. I wonder why the artist can't decide which color to make the sky. And that's what I'm reduced to talking about because there's nothing to say. There's a reason I don't mention the comedy pages in the summaries. That and it'd make things take longer. Already the only reason I make summaries is to make myself understand how I feel about the issue, but I don't mind not having them. Sabrina asks Harvey what's happening to their beautiful countryside, complaining that the rivers are full of junk, even when there's a sign here saying no dumping. So you'd think that would be illegal and that wouldn't continue to happen. And then Sabrina used magic to clean up the entire river and erase Harvey's memory of this. And then used magic to brainwash the owner of that factory into never littering again. No, that'd be good writing. Instead, a huge amount of panels are wasted with Sabrina pointlessly bitching about the pollution. We already did a story like this. I didn't think this would happen again. Writer, you do know we agreed with you in the first panel, right? We're not idiots. You don't need to drive the point home. Everyone hates pollution. If it gets dragged out longer than necessary, it makes the story feel like an unprofessional, unrestrained author diatribe because he's letting himself be too mad at pollution and wants to rant. Because he's mad at feeling powerless. But that would be more appreciated and better disguised if the plot was actually progressing the whole time, with a new thing happening every panel. RG Sonic never annoyed me with this message. At least it's interesting to see her deal with this instead of Sonic. She thinks they should write the mayor of their town and tell him to do something about this. She should say just Harvey should write the letter, because this is the 70s. She wouldn't be taken seriously. Sabrina says they'll go home and do that right now because everyone else waits until the situation is out of hand. Wouldn't this count more as waiting than simply cleaning it all up with magic and then brainwashing the factory owner yourself? That's what anyone would do if they had to deal with this as a witch. But I guess this was considered worth it to write to show normal people what the realistic way to deal with the situation is. Speaking of the writer not knowing when to stop ranting, an entire page is wasted on Sabrina recapping to Hilda. Harvey complains that one of his best tires was damaged by the pollution. Sabrina would have fixed that and erased his memory of that fact. Hilda says that writing the letter is a waste of time, which is something a lot of people would say in this situation, including me. And Harvey says that's why people have these problems today, because people don't care enough to let their voices be heard. It's the factory owners who have the final say though. After another tedious page is wasted, the story actually ends with Hilda saying that she's been mailing her garbage to the mayor's mansion. Really? That's the end of the story? Why didn't we get to see that? If we weren't even gonna get to see the letter get mailed to the mayor, then why was there so much focus on the decision to write the letter? The story could have been shorter. If the writer wants catharsis, isn't it obvious that a more cathartic ending would actually show that the factory stopped polluting? Instead, the ending is bleak because there's no indication that any positive change happened. That's realistic, but this is the comic about witchcraft. If the story's gonna end here, I don't feel like that was worth it. You know the writers failed at writing the story when even the people who think he's right about his message started getting bored of it. If anything, stories like this do nothing but encourage people not to care about environmentalism, because it makes environmentalists look bad. They're too busy looking angry at it, when they should be drawn to look sad. And an easy way to make a message look bad is to have the person saying it look angry, because it makes them look like a jerk who's getting too worked up. I think it'd be more productive for the writer to pick up a bunch of litter instead of writing a story about this that does nothing. The first story is about a bully of Harvey falling in love with a woman, and then the woman inexplicably says that he's too kind and gentle to abuse his power like a bully, even when he's about to hit someone. And then she says that he'll only talk when she tells him to. But he's still in love with her, when you'd expect that to remind him of his parents. But she called him a thug, so she doesn't know his true nature. This woman was so convenient and obvious and on the nose that at first I assumed she was Sabrina in disguise, shapeshifted to try to guilt him into being a better person. Instead, it turned out that Sabrina was there and just watching, and the only magic involved was love. I really hated that Dell forbids Sabrina from using magic to bully the bully. Wouldn't that count as evil too, because two wrongs don't make a right? It'd make more sense for her to use that as a reason to forbid her. Instead, she thinks it's not evil at all. Della would be just as annoying if she meddled in her spell casting to prevent her from abusing her magic. Either way, Sabrina would be less of an escapist character, letting us imagine what's like to have magic. Because we certainly would imagine having people lecture us about when to use magic as a part of that fantasy. That's the problem with Sabrina's uncle and overly strict aunt in the animated series. And you'd think Della would be busy most of the time. The point is, Sabrina stops being an escapist character when she can't even use her magic however she wants. It's realistic, but it tries to suck all the fun out of magic. I think the story was written to be an idealistic story that made the writer feel good about the idea that anybody could be redeemed. It went on far too long with that one plot point though. The next story is an uncomfortable one, where Reggie insists on showing up when Sabrina's babysitting, and eventually forces himself on her. So she punishes him by having get hurt with magic over and over again. It makes him think that he was losing his mind instead of being honest about it. That wasn't worth having to see him try to kiss her against her will though. Neither of them really looked like a good guy. Sabrina was too afraid of looking rude and hurting his feelings to just be blunt with him right away and tell him to leave, because she doesn't like him, which would have avoided the whole plot. But that's not in her nature. She's an all-loving hero in this comic. The third story is about a slow wimp named Snail who gets mercilessly teased, even by Archie. So Sabrina gets driven to the breaking point and uses magic to make him faster than them in a race. But that just makes Snail get an ego and stop being likable, which according to Sabrina, only proves her point because she wants to be a normal teenager. If she really wanted to be a normal teenager, she wouldn't use magic at all. She just can't resist the temptation. I'll give Jail Whale an honorable mention because it's a comedy page that actually makes me laugh. That's extremely rare in this comic. It made sense that Sabrina would accidentally send Reggie to jail when trying to make that happen to him in Monopoly. In fact, he probably deserves to be in jail after this is shown. Still, you'd think she would have imagined him landing on the jail space and saying, "Darn," instead of that happening. She just didn't think long enough when she was doing the spell, I guess. The final story is a frustratingly slow-paced waste of time where the writer lets himself get too mad at river pollution and has Sabrina and Harvey bitch about it for way too long. When this is a witch, she could fix it instantly and she doesn't. You'd think she'd just go to the factory itself and magically make it environmentally friendly and brainwash people into not being able to question it. Archie Sonic did this better because they still had the pacing beat fast and understood that we agreed with its point in the first panel. Just looking at pollution the first time already makes you get the message. The characters have every reason to be ranting about this, but it just gets you angry and reminds you of a real-world problem you can do nothing about, which is horrible for the escapism that Sabrina is meant for. You don't read a story about an omnipotent teenage witch to be reminded of unacceptable real-life problems you're escaping from. It was great for the message that Sabrina wrote a letter to the mayor about it, and it shows how a regular person might make a difference in this, giving the story an actual point. But still, it wasted most of its comic space on frustrating redundancy, and didn't even show us a happy ending to make the whole thing worth it. You'd think if the writer wanted catharsis, he would have ended the story with the factory being completely clean. Instead, Hilda tells us that she mails her garbage to the mayor's house. What does that have to do with getting the factory to change? Why didn't we see Sabrina warp the garbage away from the river and brainwash the factory owner into being considerate? She's fine with brainwashing people into being in love. Why have a witch in a story if she won't even get to act like one? That's the problem with the story. It's not a Sabrina story, it's an everything story. The writer has failed when even people who agree with this message get annoyed by it. Sabrina and Harvey should have just been sad. Making them angry the whole time could just make them look like jerks who need to focus on something else.